A boy sits alone in the dim glow of a dying fire. His world is silent except for the distant cry of wolves in the Kentucky wilderness. His father is gone. His mother, the one person who encouraged his curiosity, was gone, buried beneath the frozen earth when he was just 9 years old. The weight of survival rests on his frail shoulders. And yet, in this moment, he does not think of hunger. He does not think of the bitter wind sneaking through the cracks in the cabin walls. He is lost in the words on the page, words that will shape him and become his only weapon in a world where he has nothing. His father does not believe in books. His neighbors see reading as a waste of time. But this boy knows something they do not, that words are power, and power is the only way out. He does not know it yet, but this moment, this hunger for knowledge, this refusal to accept the fate handed to him, will change history, because this boy, born into nothing, will rise to become the leader of a fractured nation, a man whose words will shake the world, a president whose choices will decide the fate of millions. But before the glory, before the legend, before the history books, there was only the struggle. The man, the myth, the legend. But what if everything you thought you knew was only half the story? What if the truth was far more brutal and far more extraordinary? We remember the speeches, the monuments, the legacy, but before the White House, before Gettysburg, before his name was written in history books, there was the boy, the failure, the outcast, the man who faced rejection, heartbreak, and loss so devastating it nearly swallowed him whole. This is the story schools won't tell you. The story of a man who clawed his way from nothing to the highest office in the land. The story of how he defied fate itself. The story of Abraham Lincoln. How does a poor farm boy, with no formal education, no wealth, no powerful connections, rise to lead an entire nation? How does a man rejected by his own father go on to inspire generations? The answer is not in luck. It is not in destiny. It is in a struggle. Because before he would stand on the steps of the White House, before he would sign the words that would change history, he would have to endure. He would have to fail. Again, and again, and again. The year is 1809. In a cabin no larger than a stable, in the middle of the Kentucky wilderness, a child is born. His family owns nothing. No wealth, no land of great value, no status. The world does not know his name. Not yet, but history will remember it forever. Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was not born into privilege. He was born into struggle. His father, Thomas Lincoln, was a hard man, a struggling farmer, constantly chasing the dream of owning land, yet never quite grasping it. To him, education was a waste of time. Books would not put food on the table. A boy's worth was measured by the strength of his arms, not the power of his mind. There was no time for books, no time for dreams, only survival. Abraham had no formal education, no teacher to guide him, no schoolhouse to shelter him from the biting cold. But he had something else, a hunger, a relentless thirst for knowledge. And so, after long days of labor, when his body ached and his eyes burned from exhaustion, he read. He taught himself. He turned every moment of stillness into an opportunity to learn. Some life lessons come too soon, too sudden, too cruel. At just 9 years old, Abraham Lincoln learned what it meant to lose the one person who truly saw him. His mother, Nancy, the woman who encouraged his reading, who whispered words of kindness when his father would not, was slipping away. Milk sickness, the silent killer of the frontier, had come for her, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The last words of his mother to him were,
"Be good to your father Abraham. And sister."
Her eyes flutter closed. A long pause. Then silence. Abraham squeezes his mother's hand tighter, his lips trembling. He doesn't want to let go. But death does not wait for permission. Nancy's breath slows, then stops. He did not cry. Not then. Not in front of his father. But something changed in him that day. At just 9 years old, Abraham Lincoln learned the cruelest truth of all. Life does not care for the weak. It does not care for the poor. It takes without mercy. And for those left behind, there is only one choice: endure or be broken. Some men accept the world as it is. Others shape it. Abraham Lincoln knew, even then, that knowledge was his way out. That education was his weapon. He read everything he could get his hands on: biographies, law books, the Bible. He copied passages by hand when he had no paper. He memorized words when he had no ink, because he understood one simple truth: the best way to predict your future is to create it. Lincoln's story is not just about history. It is about you. How many times have you faced obstacles and let them stop you? How often do you tell yourself that success is reserved for those born into wealth, into privilege? Lincoln had none of those things. He had only his mind, his determination, and that was enough. What are you doing with yours? The endless green of Indiana is replaced by the flowing expanse of the Mississippi River. The air is thick with heat and the scent of water and wood. 18-year-old Abraham Lincoln stands at the helm of a flatboat, his friend Allen Gentry beside him. For the first time in his life, Lincoln left behind the world he knew, the isolation of the frontier, the backbreaking labor of the farm. Ahead lay the unknown, the bustling city of New Orleans, a city of trade, of wealth, and of cruelty. The boat drifts lazily downstream, the rhythmic creaking of wood beneath their feet. They pass forests, small towns, and then something different. The noise is overwhelming. Merchants shouting, people haggling, laughter, music. The young Lincoln's eyes widen. He has never seen such a place. New Orleans was alive in a way Lincoln had never experienced. It was the heartbeat of the South, where wealth and industry flourished. But beneath its golden facade lay something else, something Lincoln could not ignore. The noise fades. The laughter dulls. Lincoln steps slow as he sees it. A crowd gathered in the distance, their eyes fixed on something in the center. A wooden platform stands in the middle of the square. On it, a group of men, women, and children, chains around their wrists and ankles. A tall man in fine clothes holds a whip, motioning to them as he speaks. Strong boy, 15 years old. Look at them shoulders, built for labor. Who will start the bidding? Said the auctioneer with a loud, commanding voice. A young black boy, barely older than 10, stands trembling. His mother, shackled beside him, grips his hand. Don't be shy, gentlemen. A fine price for a healthy one, said the auctioneer. The mother pleads, her voice breaking.
Please don't separate us, please.
A hand goes up. A price is called. The boy is pulled away. His mother screams. Lincoln watches, his fists clenched at his sides, his breath unsteady, his heart pounding. His friend Allen nudges him. Abe, keep walking. This ain't our business, said his friend. But Lincoln does not move. This was not a story in a book, not words on a page. This was real. This was happening. And for the first time in his life, Abraham Lincoln saw the true cost of slavery, not as an idea, but as a nightmare. Lincoln's face filled with different expressions: shock, rage, sorrow. A storm was brewing beneath the surface. Later that night, Lincoln sits on the dock, staring at the river. His voice is quiet but firm. Lincoln said to Allen, "If ever I get a chance to hit that thing, I'll hit it hard." He was just 18. He had no power, no voice in the world. But that night, Lincoln made a silent promise to himself. One day, if fate allowed, he would fight this. He would strike at it with all he had. He was no genius, no chosen one, no golden boy destined for greatness. He was a boy born in the dirt, shaped by hunger, raised in hardship, a man whose hands knew more about failure than they ever knew about victory. He had no wealth, no connections, no education worthy of a statesman, only a hunger, an unrelenting hunger that neither failure nor loss could extinguish. But fate had other plans. Before he became the man whose words could shake a nation, before the towering speeches and the war that would define him, he was something else entirely. A man drowning in debt, a man discarded by fortune, a man who, time and time again, found himself face to face with failure. He had tried everything, every path, every opportunity, and every single one led to the same place: ruin. Lincoln, slightly younger, unloading sacks of grain from a wagon, his face lined with exhaustion. He wiped sweat from his brow and steps inside the tiny store he had poured his hopes into. A general store, his first real business venture. He and a partner scraped together what little they had, stocking shelves with goods they hoped would sell. For a moment, it seemed promising, until it wasn't. The debts piled up. The customers stopped coming. His business partner abandoned him, leaving Lincoln with nothing but unpaid bills and a name tarnished by failure. The store fades into emptiness. The shelves are bare. Lincoln sits at the counter, staring at the ledger filled with red ink. He exhales, closing his eyes, as the sound of a hammer pounding against the door startles him. A debt collector has come. Again. He had nothing. No way to pay. He was drowning in debt so deep that for years he would be known as Honest Abe, not because of his virtue, but because he owed so much that he had no choice but to promise he would pay someday. And yet, despite the weight of financial ruin, he refused to run. He refused to flee to another town, to change his name, to disappear into the shadows. He stayed. He faced it. But it would not be the last time failure came knocking. A small post office. A younger Lincoln sits at a wooden desk, absent-mindedly flipping through letters. The place is barely functioning. The shelves are disorganized. The ink pot is nearly empty. A lone customer enters, looking unimpressed. A new opportunity. A fresh start. The position of postmaster was small, but it was something. Steady work. A role of some importance in the town. And yet, it was doomed from the start. Lincoln had little passion for it. His mind was always elsewhere, lost in books, drifting toward politics, toward philosophy. The mail was delayed. The office fell into disorder. Before long, the government shut it down. Another failure. Another door closed. Another reminder that he was not, in the eyes of the world, a man destined for success. Lincoln, now a little older, trudges through a field, surveying equipment slung over his shoulder. The sun beats down. His clothes are worn. His boots are caked in mud. He sets his tools down, adjusts his papers, and tries to concentrate. With no money, no career, and no clear path, he turned to land surveying. It was technical, demanding work, requiring precise calculations and steady hands. Lincoln had neither. He struggled. The pay was meager, the conditions brutal, and the competition fierce. He barely survived on the wages he earned, scraping by on whatever work he could find. And yet, he pressed on. Because what other choice did he have? A gust of wind scatters his survey papers across the field. Lincoln scrambled to gather them, his breath ragged, his hands shaking. In the distance, storm clouds gather. The sound of rain, the soft creaking of a wooden chair. Lincoln sits in a dimly lit room, head bowed, fingers laced together. His debt slips lay scattered across the table before him. He owed more money than he could ever hope to repay. He had no steady job, no savings, no home to call his own. He had lost his mother. He had lost his business. And now he was losing himself. Historians say that during this time, Lincoln was consumed by what he called the shadows. Melancholy gripped him like a vice, dragging him into depths of despair few could understand. He stopped eating, stopped speaking. Friends feared for his life. Some say they even removed razors from his reach, afraid of what he might do in his darkest moments. Lincoln's face, lost in thought. His eyes are hollow, distant. The rain continues outside, tapping against the glass. He was broken, a man who had tried and failed too many times. A man who, in that moment, had no reason to believe that he would ever be anything more than another forgotten name in history. But fate was not finished with him yet, because in the ashes of his failures, something else was taking shape, something greater than he could have ever imagined. This was not the end of Abraham Lincoln's story. It was only the beginning. Some men are born into power. They inherit names, wealth, and titles, never knowing the taste of struggle. But others are forged by it. They are shaped by hunger, beaten by failure, humbled by loss. And yet, No matter how many times the world tells them they are nothing, they refuse to stay down. He was not a man of privilege. He was not a man of means. He was a man who had nothing except for one thing: an idea, a vision, a belief that he could be something greater, that a poor farm boy with no formal education, no connections, no fortune, could step into the halls of power and make a difference. But belief alone was not enough, because before he could lead men, before he could change a nation, he had to endure something even more brutal than poverty. He had to face rejection, public humiliation, crushing defeat, and for Abraham Lincoln, it would come sooner than he ever expected. Standing at the edge of a small town, the air is still. A challenge is ahead. The next battle of his life is about to begin. The year is 1832. A dusty road leads into the heart of New Salem, Illinois. The town is small, barely more than a cluster of wooden buildings and dirt paths. People gather in the square, murmuring amongst themselves. A tall, lanky young man, his clothes worn, his boots caked in mud, steps onto a makeshift platform. His eyes scan the crowd. He takes a deep breath. He was 23 years old, a failed businessman, a man buried in debt. But he was restless. He wanted more than a life of endless labor, barely scraping by. He had spent years teaching himself, reading law books, studying speeches, learning the art of persuasion. And now, for the first time in his life, he stood before a crowd, not as a store clerk, not as a farmhand, but as a candidate for the Illinois state legislature. He had no political experience, no established backers, no money to fund his campaign. But what he had was a voice, and that day he used it. His voice was calm but passionate. He speaks about roads, education, and the importance of community. The people listen, intrigued. Some nod in agreement. Others remain skeptical. He spoke plainly. He spoke honestly. And for a brief moment, it seemed like he had a chance. But politics is ruthless, and the people of Illinois were not ready for him. The results of the election was posted. Lincoln's name is far down the list. He has lost, not by a small margin. He has been humiliated. The defeat was crushing. A landslide loss. A brutal rejection. For most men, it would have been enough to turn away, to return to the fields, to the simple life of hard labor, and never step foot in politics again. But Lincoln was not most men. The town moves on. People forget. The election is over. But Lincoln does not forget. He devoured all the necessary books he could get his hands on: law books, political essays, and history. He walks for miles just to borrow a single volume. His days are spent working. His nights are spent studying. He had been knocked down, publicly, embarrassingly. But instead of retreating, he prepared. If he was to speak, he would make his words sharper. If he was to lead, he would first learn. And if he was to win, he would have to become undeniable. So he studied. He read law. He trained himself in the art of debate. And little by little, the young man with no education, no formal training, no status, became something dangerous. A man who knew how to fight with words. 2 years later, another election. The sun rises over Illinois. People gather at polling stations, casting their votes. Lincoln, now 2 years older, stands at a distance, watching. He has worked for this, prepared for this, but he knows better than to be hopeful. 2 years had passed since his crushing defeat. 2 years of labor, 2 years of study, 2 years of waiting, and now, once again, the people would decide. Results being read aloud. A hush falls over the crowd. Then Lincoln's name is called. He won. He has been elected to the Illinois legislature. For the first time in his life, he has stepped into power. It was not the presidency. It was not yet history. But it was something. It was a start. And for a man like Abraham Lincoln, a start was all he needed. Standing at the edge of town, looking out over the fields, he is no longer just a farm boy. No longer just a failed businessman. He is a politician now, a leader, and his journey has only just begun. A young Abraham Lincoln, now in his late 20s, walks with a purpose, a stack of books under his arm, His boots scrape against the dirt road, his gaze fixed straight ahead. This is not the same man who suffered a humiliating defeat years before. He is sharper now, more measured, more prepared. Most men in politics were born into privilege. They had fathers who guided them, universities that trained them, and powerful friends who paved their way. Abraham Lincoln had none of these things. If he wanted to become a lawyer, he would not attend a grand university. He would not study under great professors. He would sit alone in a dark room, with only a book and his own will. His hands are covered in ink, his face tense with concentration. The words Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England rest open before him. He runs his fingers along the page, mouthing the words under his breath, determined to absorb every lesson. For hours, he read. For days, he studied. For months, he pushed himself beyond exhaustion. And when he emerged, he was not just a farm boy who liked to talk. He was Abraham Lincoln, attorney at law. Now in his early 30s, he was sitting under a tree with a woman. She has soft eyes and a gentle smile. Her name is Anne Rutledge. The two laugh together, their voices light, hopeful. This is a different side of Lincoln, a man in love. For the first time in his life, Lincoln felt something that politics and ambition could never give him. He felt love. And Rutledge was not just another woman. She was the one person who made him forget the weight of the world. She saw him not as a politician, not as a lawyer, but as a man. The two of them talked about the future, about marriage, about growing old together. Lincoln's eyes shine with something rare, hope. But fate had other plans. One day, Lincoln walked toward Anne's house, but something was wrong. He sees people gathered outside. Their faces are heavy with grief. His step slow. His breath catches. And then, he hears the words that change everything. She's gone. Lincoln knelt at Anne's grave. His hands trembled as he placed a single flower on the cold earth. They say grief makes men weaker. But for Lincoln, it made him dangerous. The light in his eyes faded. The laughter disappeared. And in its place came something else, an unstoppable determination. The air is thick with smoke, men in suits shouting over one another. This is not a place for weak men. This is a place for those who can fight with words sharper than swords. Lincoln had been elected to the Illinois legislature. But this was no victory. This was war. The political system was filled with corruption, backroom deals, greedy men who saw power as a game. And into that chaos stepped a man who refused to play by their rules. His voice is firm, his eyes unyielding. He calls out corruption, exposing those who abuse their power. Some laugh at him, others sneer. But the people, ordinary, hard-working people, begin to listen. He spoke for them. He fought for them. And in doing so, he became something more than just another politician. He became a threat. Angry politicians whispered in dark rooms and started plotting against him. Lincoln stood on the banks of the Mississippi River, watching a boat pass by. Shackled slaves stand on board, their faces hollow, their eyes lifeless. Lincoln watches, his jaw tightening. He had seen it before. As a young man, he had watched the horror of slavery unfold before his eyes. But now he had the power to fight it. The question was, did he have the courage? The world was changing. The country was dividing. The issue of slavery was no longer something men could ignore. And for Lincoln, there was no turning back. Lincoln wrote furiously at his desk, drafting speeches against slavery. Fiery debates, angry opponents, threats whispered in the shadows. Lincoln stood firm, refusing to back down. He knew this battle would not end with words. It would end with blood. Abraham Lincoln had survived poverty. He had survived humiliation. He had survived heartbreak. But the true test of his life had not even begun. The road to the presidency would demand everything from him: his friendships, his sanity, his very soul. And when he reached the highest office in the land, he would face the greatest war America had ever known. The question was no longer if he would lead. The question was, would he survive? Silence lingers for a few moments. Then a faint scratching sound, pen against paper. A hand moves across an aged parchment, carefully forming letters. The words come into focus. The government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. He had spoken these words before, but now they were no longer just words. They were a warning, a declaration, a spark waiting to set a nation on fire. The year was 1860, and the United States was no longer united. For years, the cracks had been spreading, lines drawn between North and South, between those who believed in freedom and those who fought to keep men in chains. The anger, the fear, the tension, it had reached its breaking point, and in the middle of it all was one man. A messenger arrived at Lincoln's law office in Springfield. A young boy rushes inside, breathless, shoving the letter into Lincoln's hands. He unfolds it. His eyes scan the words. A deep inhale, sharp, controlled. His hand tightens around the page. The message is simple, but it changes everything. Mr. Lincoln, you have been elected the 16th President of the United States. Roar from the crowds. Some cheer, waving banners of celebration. Others march in the streets, their faces twisted with rage. The divide is clear. Half the country sees him as their savior. The other half sees him as a threat to everything they believe in. He sat in his Springfield home, reading letters. His fingers tapped lightly against the wooden desk. The letters are different from the ones before. These are not words of congratulations. They are words of warning, words of hatred, words of death. Before he could even set foot in the White House, they wanted him dead. His mailbox overflowed with threats. Some warned him to stay out of Washington. Others promised that if he took the oath of office, he would never leave alive. They said he was tearing the country apart. But Lincoln knew the truth. The country was already broken. In a candlelit meeting in a secret chamber, a group of men huddle close, their voices hushed, but filled with venom. A map of Washington, D.C. lays before them. A route is traced in red ink. They are planning something, something final. Lincoln, standing before a mirror in his Springfield home. His reflection stares back at him. He knows. He knows that the moment he steps on that train to Washington, he may never return. It was a steam train, its engine roaring, clouds of smoke billowing into the cold morning sky. Lincoln steps aboard, his hat pulled low. His eyes scan the crowd. Somewhere out there, hidden among the faces, are men who do not want him to reach his destination. The plan was simple. If he traveled as expected, through Baltimore, along the planned route, they would be waiting. Knives in the dark, bullets from the crowd. They had one chance to stop him before he took power. If Lincoln wanted to live, he would have to travel in disguise. He no longer wearing his signature top hat, his coat replaced with a simple traveler's cloak, his face shadowed beneath the brim of a low-crowned hat. The President-elect of the United States, hiding in plain sight. The train moves through the night. The wheels clatter against the tracks. Inside, Lincoln sits in silence, his hands folded in his lap. He does not sleep. He does not speak. He waits. Hour by hour, mile by mile. He moved closer to Washington, closer to the moment history would remember. And when he arrived, the world held its breath. March 4th, 1861. The Capitol building looms, its half-finished dome casting a shadow over the city. The air is thick with tension. Soldiers stand at every corner. Riflemen position themselves on rooftops. They are not just there for show. They are there because at any moment, a shot could ring out. And if it does, Lincoln will fall. To Lincoln stepping onto the platform, the crowd is vast. Thousands stand in the streets. Some are there to witness history. Others are waiting for the moment to strike. He knew the risks. Every step he took was a step closer to death. Every word he spoke was a challenge to those who wanted him silent. But Abraham Lincoln did not waver. To Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, the man who once ruled that black Americans could never be citizens, now standing before Lincoln with a Bible in hand. Lincoln places his hand upon it. A breath, a pause, and then his voice, steady, unwavering. I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States. The words echo through the air. A nation watches. A nation waits. Lincoln sat in the Oval Office. A map of the United States is laid before him. Red markings spread across the South. State after state has seceded. The Union is unraveling. The moment Lincoln took office, war was no longer a possibility. It was a certainty. South Carolina had already left. Mississippi followed, and then Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas. The Confederate States of America was no longer a shadow in the distance. It was real. It was here, and it was ready for battle. A telegram arrived on Lincoln's desk. He reads it. His jaw clenches. His hand steady. He stands. April 12, 1861. The first cannon is fired at Fort Sumter. The war that would decide the future of America had begun. The sound of distant cannon fire echoes. The Civil War has begun. Darkness. Silence. Then a single, distant drumbeat. Slow. Measured. Steady. The nation had shattered. Some said it was beyond saving. Some said the only path forward was war. Abraham Lincoln had sworn an oath to preserve the Union. But as he sat behind his desk, staring at the map before him, one truth became painfully clear. The United States of America was no longer united. The drumbeat grows louder. Men in Southern uniforms march in formation. Confederate flags rising over state capitals. Politicians delivering fiery speeches. Crowds cheering. Others rioting in the streets. 11 states had broken away. One by one, they had turned their backs on the Union. South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Texas, then Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, Tennessee. They did not see Abraham Lincoln as their president. They did not recognize his authority, and they were willing to spill blood to prove it. A letter was delivered to Lincoln's desk. The wax seal is broken. The letter unfolds. Lincoln's expression hardens as he reads it. "Sir, we demand the surrender of Fort Sumter." The words linger. A long pause. Then Lincoln stands. He knew what this meant. If he surrendered, he would be acknowledging the Confederacy as a real government. If he refused, war was inevitable. And yet in his heart, he already knew there would be no surrender. At the White House, the weight of the moment is written on Lincoln's face. His hands grip the edge of his desk. The war has started, and the Union is not ready. Many believed Abraham Lincoln was not the man to lead a country at war. He was no soldier. He had never led men into battle. And now, he found himself commander-in-chief of an army that was unprepared, untrained, and facing an enemy that would stop at nothing to destroy him. His cabinet whispered doubts behind closed doors. The newspapers mocked him, calling him weak, calling him a fool. And as the first battles were fought, it seemed they were right. Union soldiers, young, inexperienced, marched confidently into battle. Then chaos. Cannons roar. Smoke fills the air. The Confederate forces strike with brutal precision. Union troops break, fleeing in panic. The first great battle of the war was a disaster. Thousands of Union soldiers ran from the battlefield, their weapons discarded, their spirits shattered. The Union had been humiliated. And as the news reached Washington, Lincoln felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. Lincoln paced the Oval Office. Telegrams pile up on his desk. Reports of failure. Reports of retreat. He rubs his temples, his face weary. The losses continued. One after another. His generals, they hesitated. They were afraid to strike. Afraid to take risks. Afraid of losing. And because of that fear, men were dying. Lincoln was running out of time. Lincoln stood over a war map, his hands flat against the table. His expression is unreadable. His voice is quiet but firm. "Find me a man who will fight," he said. He had given his generals chances. He had pleaded for action. And still, the war dragged on. The South was winning battle after battle. And then he found him. At a battlefield in the West. Smoke clears to reveal a rugged, determined figure sitting atop a horse, his uniform dust-covered, his face unreadable. He watches as his men charge forward, relentless, unstoppable. His name was Ulysses S. Grant, and he did not hesitate. When faced with the enemy, He did not retreat. He did not overthink. He did not wait. He struck, and he won. Lincoln received a telegram. He opens it. A slight smile, rare but real, crosses his lips. Victory at Vicksburg. Grant has taken the Mississippi. For the first time, Lincoln saw a path forward. Grant was not like the others. Grant did not flinch in the face of war. And so, in the darkest days of the conflict, Lincoln made a decision. Lincoln standing before his advisors. The room is silent. Then he speaks, calm, firm, absolute. I want General Grant in command of all Union forces. The room erupts. Protests. Concerns. Grant is reckless, they say. He drinks too much, they warn. Lincoln listens. Then he answers. I cannot spare this man. He fights. A rustling of paper. The slow scratch of a quill against parchment. The breathing of a man deep in thought. For 2 years, the war had raged. 2 years of blood. 2 years of loss. The Union had fought to preserve the country. But now, Abraham Lincoln was about to change everything. A candle flickers, revealing Lincoln at his desk. His eyes scan the document before him. His expression is unreadable, steady, but heavy with the weight of the moment. He knew the risks. He knew the outrage it would cause. He knew the enemies it would create, not just in the South, but within his own government, among his allies. But he also knew this. If this war was to mean anything, it had to be about more than just keeping the Union together. It had to be about freedom. Lincoln lifted the quill. He hesitates for just a second. Then, with steady hands, he signs his name. On January 1st, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. The war was no longer just about the Union. It was a war for the soul of America. Newspaper presses started rolling, printing the words that would change the course of history. Slaves declared free in the Confederacy. The pages fly through the machines, snatched up by eager hands. The reactions are immediate. Anger, shock, celebration. A nation erupts. It was a proclamation heard around the world. To the enslaved, it was a promise, a flicker of hope. To abolitionists, it was long overdue. To the South, it was an unforgivable act of war. And even in the North, it was not welcomed by all. A political meeting was set up, angry voices, men pounding their fists on tables. Lincoln listens, his face unreadable. His allies warned him, "You will lose support. You will divide the North. You will bring more blood upon this nation." But Lincoln did not waver. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back. At the battlefield, Union soldiers marched forward, their banners no longer just carrying the stars and stripes, but a cause greater than themselves. The Emancipation Proclamation did not free every enslaved man and woman overnight, but it sent a message. This war was no longer just about politics. It was about justice. Enslaved men in the South, watching, waiting. Then, one by one, they begin to walk, then run. Then, entire groups flee toward Union lines, seeking freedom, seeking a new life. And for the first time, they had somewhere to go. Lincoln had declared their freedom, but it would take an army to secure it. At the battlefield, rain falls. Union soldiers, exhausted, march through thick mud. But they do not retreat. They push forward, and leading them is one man, his coat soaked, his expression unmoving. The war had raged for 2 years. Lincoln had found his general. Grant did not know the meaning of retreat. "We're not going back. We'll fight them here. We'll fight them tomorrow. And we'll fight them until we win," said Grant. Unlike the generals before him, Grant did not hesitate. Where others saw obstacles, he saw opportunities. Where others pulled back, he pushed forward. And with every battle, the tide began to turn. Now to the Siege of Vicksburg. Grant's men surround the Confederate stronghold. Weeks pass. Starvation sets in. The Confederate army weakens. Then finally, the white flag rises. The Mississippi River now belonged to the Union. The South was being strangled. The end was coming. Lincoln was reading another telegram. He exhales, almost in relief. He looks up at his advisor and says only one thing. "Grant is my man." April 1865. The war that had torn the nation apart was finally coming to an end. General Robert E. Lee had surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. The fighting was over, but not the hatred. At Washington, D.C., crowds cheer in the streets. Union flags wave. Men shake hands. Women embrace their loved ones returning from war. Hope fills the air. For the first time in 4 long years, there was peace. And at the heart of it all stood one man, a man who had carried the weight of a nation on his shoulders, a man who had seen more death, more sorrow, more loss than any leader before him, Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln at the White House stood on a balcony, addressing a crowd below. His face is weary, but his voice is steady. He speaks, and the people listen. With malice toward none, with charity for all, let us strive to bind up the nation's wounds. Lincoln said he had done what many believed to be impossible. He had held the country together, but not everyone saw him as a hero, and in the shadows his enemies watched. Lincoln walked through the White House late at night. The halls are empty. He moved slowly, deep in thought. He had dreamed of this moment. America whole again. He had spoken to his closest friends about what would come next. We must rebuild the South. We must heal the wounds of war. Lincoln is sitting in a chair, staring into the fireplace, lost in thought. But there was something else. Something he could not explain. A feeling. A heaviness that sat deep within his chest. Lincoln spoke softly to his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln. I have had a strange dream again. For 3 nights, he had the same dream. He saw a coffin in the White House, a nation in mourning. He asked the guards in his dream, "Who is dead in the White House?" And they answered him, "The President." April 14th, 1865, the last day of his life. Washington streets at dusk was alive with celebration. Gas lamps flicker. Carriages rolled down cobblestone streets. It was Good Friday. The Lincolns had been invited to Ford's Theater. A night of entertainment. A moment of relief. Ford's Theater. The play, Our American Cousin, is in progress. The audience laughs. Lincoln sits in the presidential box, smiling. He had not wanted to go. He was exhausted, but Mary insisted.
"It'll do you good, Abraham."
And so he went. A figure moved through the darkness. A man approaches the back entrance of the theater, slipping inside unnoticed. In the crowd, no one saw him. No one suspected. John Wilkes Booth, actor, Confederate sympathizer, and the man who had decided that Lincoln should not live to see his country reunited. Booth climbed the stairs, his footsteps silent. He reaches the back of the presidential box. He grips the handle of his pistol. Inside the theater, laughter fills the air. Lincoln leans back at his chair, and then a single gunshot. Chaos inside the theater. Screams. People rushing to the presidential box. Mary Todd Lincoln sobbing, clutching her husband's hand. A single bullet, fired into the back of his head. The laughter turned to panic. The joy turned to horror. Booth jumping onto the stage, shouting something before vanishing into the night. John Wilkes Booth had escaped. The president had not. A group of men carrying Lincoln's limp body out of the theater, across the street, to a small boarding house. They lay him on a bed, too small for his tall frame. They tried to save him, but the wound was fatal. There was nothing left to do but wait. Lincoln lying unconscious. The room is silent. His breathing is shallow. His pulse weakens. For 9 hours, the nation held its breath. Then, at 7:22 a.m., April 15th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln took his final breath. Thousands lined the streets, silent, heads bowed. The nation, mourning the man who had saved it. The war had ended. The country had been saved. But the man who had held it together was gone. Time moved forward, but the spirit of his life never faded. The man was gone, but what he left behind could never be erased. The morning sun barely peeks through a blanket of mist. A single American flag waves in the distance. The nation, fractured, blood-stained, and weary, had been pulled back from the edge of destruction. But it had come at a price. It was Lincoln's funeral procession. Thousands stand in silence. The sound of muffled footsteps, of horses pulling the casket, of a nation grieving. He was not just a leader. He was a question that would be asked for generations to come. How does one man hold a country together when it is determined to tear itself apart? How does a leader stay the course when every step forward is met with doubt, resistance, and hate? And most of all, what does it mean to lead, not for power, not for wealth, but for something greater than oneself? At the ruins of the battlefields, Gettysburg, Antietam, Shiloh, the land is scarred, the trees are broken, the price of war is still soaked beneath the earth. When Abraham Lincoln took office, the country was on the verge of collapse. His election alone had been enough to split the nation in two. 11 states had left the Union. Battles had torn across the land. And for 4 long years, America had been at war with itself. But he made a choice. He could have sought peace through compromise. He could have taken the easy road. But he did not. In 1863, he signed a document that would change the course of history, the Emancipation Proclamation. With that one act, he did more than free the enslaved. He redefined what America stood for. The war had been fought to preserve the Union, but by the end, it was about something much greater. It was about freedom. It was about whether this nation would stand for what it had promised in its very first breath, that all men are created equal. A teacher writes Lincoln's name on the board. Students listen, some taking notes, some looking out the window, unaware of the weight behind the words. More than 150 years have passed. His face is on the penny. His words are carved into stone. His name is known in every corner of the world. But history is never simple. Some call him a hero. Some call him a politician who simply made the right move at the right time. His decisions were not always perfect. His leadership was not without fault. And yet, the Union still stands. The echoes of his choices still shape the nation. And the question remains, what would have happened if he had failed? He did not live to see the full impact of his choices. He did not live to see Reconstruction. He did not live to see a nation truly begin to heal. But perhaps he always knew that leadership is not about seeing the end. It is about choosing the path. He was never meant to lead. He was born in poverty. He failed more times than most men would dare to try. He battled loss, rejection, and his own demons. But in the end, he did not break. And because of that, neither did the nation. It has been more than a century. The battles have ended. The voices that once filled the streets, cheering, cursing, praying, have long faded into history. The man himself is gone, but his words remain. Abraham Lincoln did not seek greatness, but he understood something that many men, far richer, far more powerful, never did. That the course of history is not determined by those who wait. It is shaped by those who stand, those who endure, those who create the future, even when the world tells them they cannot. And so, we return to his words. The best way to predict the future is to create it. These are not just words from a man long gone. They are a challenge, a call to action, a question that transcends time. What will you create? A boy with no wealth, no connections, no privilege. A boy who lost his mother, buried his dreams, and faced a world that gave him nothing. But he did not wait for fate to change. He did not surrender to the weight of hardship. He fought. He learned. He stood tall, even when the world tried to push him down. His story is not just history. It is proof. Proof that no failure is final. Proof that no hardship is too great. Proof that no man is born destined to lead, but that leadership is forged in struggle and loss, in the courage to stand when others fall. The question now is not what Lincoln did. The question is, what will you do? Will you let hardship define you? Will you let failure break you? Or will you rise, as he did? Now, I want to hear from you. Which part of Lincoln's journey spoke to you the most? The struggle? The failures? The resilience? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, stories of strength, of wisdom, of men and women who changed the world, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Because history is filled with stories that inspire, and yours is just beginning.